Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Spotlight. This is a really special Spotlight, actually, and this is the first time I've ever done one with a co-host. Martin, thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
And I'm really excited about this, and I called Martin in for this because we have with us today Mr. Devon Eriksen, who is a sci-fi author of a fantastic book by the name of Theft of Fire, which I finished reading, and I loved. I really enjoyed it. And as I was reading this book, and as I ran across Mr. Eriksen on Twitter or X, I started thinking, putting 2 + 2 together. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I thought that maybe you guys, the members and the subscribers, would appreciate not only this book as a source of fresh and unique sci-fi, but also having a chance to meet the person behind that and to give Devon some exposure, which I think is truly well deserved, because this book, I want to read the sequel. One of my first questions is going to be, when is book 2 coming out? But first, before I get to that, I wanted to say hello, Devon. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for agreeing to come on. Thank you to Christine, your wife / social media manager, for putting us in touch. And thank you for writing this book. I enjoyed it. I was not able to put it down, especially in the last half of the book, which just kind of, started and this kept running. But before I get to that point, Theft of Fire, that sounds almost Promethean in a way.
Oh, yes. There are some inspirations from the Prometheus story in there, although I try not to be too literary. I think literary stuff has kind of given itself a bad name lately because it's so easy to use I have a message and I have themes as an excuse for not being fun. And in my opinion, if a book isn't enjoyable to read, no matter how profound you think you are, you failed.
I think that right there is something that 90% of Hollywood these days seems to have forgotten. I don't know. What do you think, Martin?
Oh, absolutely. The message is all important. And often the science fiction, particularly we get, is just so downbeat and depressing. And no wonder it's a dying medium right now.
Yeah, well, it's thinly veiled allegories to modern politics. And, I'm not here to talk about modern politics because we spend too much time doing that already. But one of the things that I think Hollywood really doesn't realize is that this turns off even people who agree with your message. Because anytime you can see through the text and you can see the author on his soapbox shouting at you, you remember that you're reading a story and it's only a story and somebody made it up. And you lose that suspension of disbelief. You lose that ability to get sucked into the story and just experience it, because now you're thinking about the author and now you're thinking about what he wants to tell you. And that defeats the whole purpose of having a story. We read stories, we watch stories to imagine different places and times and to imagine what it's like to be different people. And if there's too much message, if you preach harder than you entertain, then all of a sudden we're back in our own world listening to somebody try to persuade us of something.
There's a saying about a phenomenon breaking the fourth wall, and that happens in comics. Deadpool, who's coming out in a movie next month, is renowned for that sort of thing, of speaking to the reader directly. But even then, it's used very sparingly, in a funny way, and not in a soapbox manner. And so I do feel that, Devon, you've rightly pointed out, it's almost a tool that's been abused far too much by not just the Hollywood executives, but I think creatives in general in the last decade.
Oh, yeah. Well, when a Deadpool comic does it, it's not the author breaking the fourth wall. It's Deadpool breaking the fourth wall. Mm-hmm. And it's shown to illustrate not only how insane he is, but how it sort of plays with this theme of there is sometimes insight in madness. And he realizes he's a character in a story. So he, being mad, has insights that sane people don't. And that's that's a wonderful story element, but it's not the same as the author breaking the fourth wall and preaching to you.
Something you said made me think of how so much of movies and television and everything today is it's meta or it breaks the fourth wall, but what it doesn't have is sincerity. And I feel like now that I'm thinking along these lines, Theft of Fire is a pretty sincere book. It's hard science fiction.
Oh yeah,
but you've got some messages you weave through there, particularly things about not giving up and self-reliance, but also learning to rely on other people. It's a very sincere book, but it doesn't beat you over the head with those themes.
Yeah. These are things that happened to the characters, not things that the author necessarily wants you to believe. I mean, Larry Niven famously said that we have a technical literary term for people who believe that the opinions of characters are the opinions of authors. We call them idiots. And I have a technical literary term for authors who write characters who share all their exact opinions. I call them idiots. But yeah, I think the sincerity that you're seeing comes from a place of my motivation to write the book in the first place. Because, as a kid, I was the son of one of the lead engineers on the Voyager project.
Really?
T3PO Voyager spacecraft.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was sitting there as like this 5, 6, 7-year-old kid at all of these Voyager press conferences, watching as these pictures came up on the screen in real time. And we were all seeing them for the first time. We were the first humans to see them. They'd come up live at the press conference. And I was like, a lot of the talking stuff is pretty boring when you're 7 years old, but seeing those pictures, it was like, we're going to go out there someday and we're going to live out there someday. And a lot of that childhood was spent, in the back of a library with a stack of science fiction books as high as my head. And it was this wonderful era of the 70s and 80s where there was not only really good science fiction being written, but there was so much of a backlog from previous decades that was there to discover.
Oh, yeah.
And there wasn't really a lot of trash on the shelves, because these original founders of these science fiction publishing imprints were still alive. And these guys were very skilled talent scouts. They knew when someone was a good writer. So you could go and pick something off the shelf, and it might not necessarily be exactly to your taste, but it was well written. And more than that, it was hopeful. It was about futures that people were excited about. Even if bad things sometimes happened in those futures, it was like, what's it like for us to be a more advanced species? What's it like for us to live in a more advanced civilization? What will it be like when technology empowers us more? And that was the science fiction that I grew up with. And for various reasons that we could probably talk for 6 hours about and only scratch the surface, that kind of science fiction really went away with the changing face of the Manhattan-based publishing industry. Like literally, you now have like 5 companies doing most of the publishing in America, and they all exist within the same 10 blocks of New York City, and they all go to the same parties. So it sort of went away, and we got a lot of post-apocalyptic despair, and we got a lot of sort of dystopian nightmares, and we got a lot of preachy stuff. And I wasn't done with the old-fashioned sort of excited about the future science fiction. So I said, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. I'll do it myself. And so, I updated the science, but I left the form of the story very much in the same kind of tone that you see in these, in Larry Niven and in like the old William Gibson Neuromancer, this kind of thing, this kind of, these are the new exciting technologies that will shape the future, and this is how it will affect people's lives.
What you just explained about your childhood suddenly makes things a lot clearer to me after reading this book, because the amount of knowledge you portray in this novel about spatial physics, essentially, the solar system, how to get about it, the hard science fiction in this book that's not just something you randomly pick up off of Google. And so the fact that you had that connection to Voyager suddenly makes a lot of things click into place for me.
Yeah. Well, I did spend a couple of decades as an engineer. So
well, that too. But before we get too deep into this, though, I want you to tell us a little bit about this book. And I mean, I've got the back of it here thrown up, but I'm not going to read this out. Like, give us what this book is in your own words, basically. Marcus Warnock.
Well, it is the story of a very small handful of people who are almost forced into pulling off a heist together, and they really don't want to have anything to do with each other at first. And that kind of changes over time. I have this planned for a 4-book series, and it goes all the way from petty criminal gets blackmailed into a mission he doesn't want to go on, to the technological singularity and the fate of the galaxy. So we're going to cover a lot of territory.
But I love that. I love the pullback of you start off, as you said, on petty criminal getting blackmailed. Yeah. And you keep sort of expanding the scope to an extra solar level. But keep going. Tell us about the characters.
And basically, it's a story that is driven by these characters, by Marcus Warnock, who is a failed asteroid miner. His business is going under, and he's sort of turned to petty crime to try to keep things afloat.
Didn't seem so petty in the descriptions.
Well, there's that, yes. Depends on your viewpoint, but yes. And then one day he returns to his docked spacecraft to find someone there waiting for him, and she's set him up. And she has a folder of blackmail material on him, plenty thick, and she's going to make him do what she wants. And she's got a quest she wants to go on, and she's not even going to tell him what it is. Not at first. He has to find this out. So he doesn't take this lying down, and he's going to try to fight back any way he can. And then, as you can see, there's a third character on the cover who shows up later. And I don't know how spoilerific you want me to get here, but
I mean,
your book.
It's your book. I think I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about a few things. I'm not gonna, touch on major spoilers and the like, but I will say I appreciated the fact that in your description just now, you're talking about Marcus and how he's fighting back against being blackmailed.
Yeah.
What I very much enjoyed about this book was the fact that the people actually acted like people, like real people. There's that joke about, they even made a movie about Cabin in the Woods where you're lost in the forest, and you come across this old cabin, and the door's hanging off, and there might be bloodstains on there, and the people go in. And when in reality, you'd be like, nope, I'm not even going near that place. I'm going to turn around and go the other way. And so I felt at least that the motivations, the way that the characters acted, Marcus especially, it's exactly what any normal, rational person would do in a situation like that. Like, you would fight back, and you would keep fighting back, and it was really, really, it was great to read, because what I have issue with in a lot of media these days, especially stuff coming out from the Disney Corporation, is that these characters just don't make sense. They do not behave as normal people would. And there's again a running joke of, are half of these scripts, are half of these episodes, are half of these movies being just written up by some AI that was dropped on its head? So for that reason alone, I really enjoyed the take that you had on the characters. I don't know, Martin, do you have anything? Am I rambling too much?
No, I don't think you're rambling too much. But you and I are used to each other.
Yes.
Well, I could sit here all day and listen to people tell me how much they loved my writing. I'm very patient with that.
I feel like, I guess our main protagonist, Marcus, I liked his ethos of work the problem. It had a real Mercury, Gemini, Apollo sort of feel to it. And I also like that at the outset of the book, he is a man who's in a world of his own making, but not one of his own choosing.
Yeah.
And things just keep getting worse and keep getting worse, and he just keeps working the problem.
Yeah. And it's a good, we've all seen the movie trope where, the protagonist wakes up in a dumpster, or he's at that low point in his life where he's like, where he's like, he's out of work, he's living in this little hole apartment, and he's throwing pizza and ice cream in a blender for breakfast, and and then he looks at this picture of his daughter that he hasn't seen in 7 years, and he decides, damn it, I've got to get my life together. And he starts making better decisions. And we all like that story of someone who has failed and then brings that to success, who learns to be a better person.
Rooting for the underdog.
And I did that with 2 characters in this book, where you have 2 very, very profoundly dysfunctional people, and somehow they manage to be the right kind of dysfunctional to help each other get their stuff together.
On the subject of the 2 people, Hangry and I had started out reading this book about the same time, and we were talking about the relationship between Miranda and Marcus.
Yeah.
And his point of reference for them was Han and Leia. The princess thing obviously lends to that. And my point of reference, even though I'm a bit young for it, was Romancing the Stone.
Yeah. I would say a little bit of both of those.
Yeah.
On that point too, I wanted to ask, so the Miranda character, okay, backing up for a second.
Yes.
One of the other things that I appreciated about this book is your predictions of the future and where things come from and where things might be going. I thought those were very realistic takes. There is something that occurs in this novel, which is not hard sci-fi. It involves, and I guess this is going to be a little bit of spoilers here, but I think that's already ingrained into the description of the book. There is an extraterrestrial presence in this book, but
there's some alien technology.
There's alien technology, but the way that you framed how we as a species would react to that technology, like I could 100% see what happened in your novel actually happening in real life if this actually came about.
Yeah, if we come across the junkyard of an impossibly advanced species, you just know we're going to cut the stuff up and start repurposing it to our own ends without even necessarily understanding what a lot of this stuff was originally for.
And controlling access to it.
Yes.
That I felt the corporate maneuvering and just the corporate world building, I thought was very, very on point for a universe like this.
That was something I wanted to bring up too.
Yeah.
Because your vision of how this would play out, and I think it's right, is instead of selling things, all these major corporations will lease them, which is the model that we see everywhere today. The you'll own nothing and you'll be happy model of living.
Yeah. I'm going to have to just nod and smile.
Uh-oh. All right. Fair enough.
Because there are things that will happen in sequels. That we'll talk about this further.
Okay. Fair enough.
So we're gonna have to move on to the next one. It's an excellent question, but it will be answered by sequels.
Well, you certainly set it up in this novel.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And the world building is great. The one sort of series that came to mind when I was reading this as well was The Expanse. And I wonder if there was influence or inspiration from that series of novels as well, particularly with the Belters.
I think that Theft of Fire and The Expanse are cousins.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
They are not. The Expanse is not an ancestor of Theft of Fire. They share a common ancestor. And that common ancestor is Larry Niven's Known Space.
Got it.
That's another thing I was going to ask you about influences, because the names you're dropping are Niven. You've mentioned Neuromancer.
Yes, Heinlein.
But I was going to say I got a real strong Heinlein vibe out of your writing, and maybe that's part of that is just the relationship between the male and female character.
Heinlein is the writer I get compared to the most in reviews and such.
Well, I feel like you made a couple direct references, like the hairless ape comments and things like that.
Yes.
That's a very Heinleinian way of thinking.
Yes, that was.
In fact, he uses that phrase.
That was one of the Easter eggs. Yes, I was talking about this earlier before we started recording. One of the things that I had a lot of fun doing with Theft of Fire was that I hid little Easter eggs in there that are shout outs to a lot of the different science fiction and some books that aren't science fiction that really inspired me. and influenced how I thought about science fiction and how I thought about stories. So I slipped a lot of little Easter eggs in there to reference those. And not all of them have been found yet. It's been 6-7 months. And
oh, really?
some of them are still hiding.
Oh, that sounds like a challenge.
Yes.
Well, but moving on, as you said, because I don't want you to talk about things that you cannot talk about just yet.
Uh-huh.
One of the other things that I appreciated about this book, and again, I feel that this is a bit of how do I put that? A bit of a lost art in modern media these days, is that you don't treat the reader like an idiot. You've written this book from the perspective of Marcus Warnock, first person perspective.
Yeah.
And so that obviously gives you insight into his thoughts and into his feelings, his motivations, etc. But you're not spelling things out directly. Like, you're letting the reader you're leaving just enough there for the reader to be able to pick up on things that might have happened to him, that might have affected him. I'm speaking right now about the scene, and I'm not going to go into spoilers on this, but the ramifications of the bay door catch, put it that way.
Oh, yes.
And so you don't spell it out for people at first. Like, as he comes to this sort of significant realization, the reader kind of goes along with it. And I appreciated that. Like, it was almost like solving a little bit of a puzzle.
Yeah,
So,
well, okay, I'm going to cut in here because I'm really eager to grapple with this. Science fiction and fantasy readers are not only extremely intelligent, they like to think. They like to figure things out, because fantasy and science fiction, and I consider science fiction to be a subgenre of fantasy. The way I would define fantasy is any story set in a universe so different from the readers that the author has to make a conscious and sustained effort to explain it to the reader. This is why fantasy and science fiction have the same readership. It's because these are the people who like to be taken to a different universe and have to figure out what the rules are.
Orson Scott Card, I heard him say once that a fantasy book is one where the artist puts trees on the cover, and a science fiction book is one where they put steel bulkheads on the cover.
Yeah, could be. But the point is here that this is the readership that likes to have things to figure out. And They are highly intelligent. And something that the reader figures out for themselves lands so much harder than something that you just tell them.
Yeah.
So if you really want to inspire readers, if you really want to fire their imagination, you have to trust them. And not everyone is going to pick up on everything, but you just throw enough in there, and they're smart people. They'll get most of it, and they'll enjoy getting it. And, this is why I had to write in first person present tense. It was the only option available for the story. Now, at that time, I didn't know that writing in first person present tense was considered a sin by Manhattan publishers. But it's a story about characters misunderstanding each other. So you can't write it in past tense, because if you write it in past tense, the character telling the story has the benefit of hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
And the misunderstanding goes away. You can't have that. And it has to be in first person, because how else can I have Marcus see Miranda doing something and have all these different layers of information of what is Miranda literally doing? What do we find out about her character by the way she does it? What does Marcus think about it? And what do we find out about his character by how he thinks about it? And what does the reader perceive that is really going on that Marcus might not perceive?
And on that note, I did want to ask you, the choice of writing in first person, again, after having read the book, one of your comments, I believe, or on your website, one of your comments was that the next book, or the book after that, it will be written not in Marcus's viewpoint, but in Miranda's viewpoint.
Both.
Okay.
It will switch back and forth, but she becomes a viewpoint character in the second book. Okay.
So you kind of answered my question about why you chose the first person perspective, but taking a step back again, one of the people that you acknowledge and give thanks to is Brandon Sanderson for his masterclass on how to write books, basically. And so I'm really curious to hear a bit more about how you took that leap from, as you said, just writing kind of blocks and scenarios into actually crafting a novel proper. Because I think, they say everyone has at least one great novel in them. So few people are able to actually get that out and get it on paper. And I'd like to hear a little bit about the process behind that.
Well, I would say that everyone has one bad novel in them.
Okay. Fair enough.
Some people have a good novel after that. But this comes down to the writing process. So no one can tell you how to write. They can only tell you how they write.
Right.
Because what writing essentially is it's a form of telepathy. It takes something out of your head. It ties a bucket to a rope and it throws it into your subconscious, and you drag it across the bottom and you pull up whatever's there. You make a story out of it. And then this vision that was in your head goes into other people's heads. So the process for doing that is sort of predicated on the structure of your head. So there's as many different writing processes as there are heads. And what you find is that there's a lot of people who can write a good scene, who can come up with a good character, who can come up with an interesting idea, but they just can't make it all fit together into a story and stick with it long enough to finish it.
I feel like we're talking about Zack Snyder or Disney or Star Wars or everything right now. Sorry, but go on.
Really, because I felt personally attacked.
Well, maybe. But when someone is in that stage, what it means is that they haven't found the writing process yet. They haven't found the writing process that works for them. And so when I was watching Brandon Sanderson give these lectures, my writing process isn't his. It isn't exactly his, but there were enough similarities that I went, and that enabled me to have ideas that allowed me to design my own writing process. Mm-hmm. Because before that, I had received, I wanted to be a science fiction writer when I was a teenager.
Oh, wow.
And I received some terrible advice from adults, like, don't be an author unless you really love writing.
I think we've all heard that.
That is really, really, really stupid advice. Because I'll tell you a secret. Nobody loves writing. What sustains you, what makes you want to work, is that you love your story. You don't love sitting in front of a blank page and you write a sentence and you hate the sentence and you delete the sentence and you write another sentence and you hate that sentence too. It happens to all of us. Nobody loves it, but you love your story and that keeps you going. And then you'll see writing advice like, just write it down. Just write it down and edit it later. Just let it flow onto the page. No. Silence your inner editor. No. My inner editor is part of me. He's trying to help me. He's my friend. So I had to find a process that works with that. And there are writers that are what we call gardeners, where they will start out at the beginning and they have no idea where they're going and they just write and they just let it flow onto the page and that works for them. These are typically the guys where their stuff is really imaginative, their characters are really well imagined, but they have a little bit of trouble with their endings. So think Stephen King.
Yep.
And George Martin are gardener writers.
George Martin so much he can't even end it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's painted himself into a corner.
Yes, he has.
J.J. Abrams is renowned for that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not a closer either.
Yeah. And then on the opposite end, you have architects, and architects plan everything. And I am an architect. I am the architect's architect. When I sit down to write a novel, I typically end up writing about 25 to 35,000 words before I write the first word that a reader will actually see. All that other stuff is outlines and summaries and notes and just scaffolding to put the story on.
So Okay, this will be obviously something down the line, but would there ever be a consideration on your part to let the reader eventually see some of that stuff? Or is that
Well, if you break into the kitchen, there isn't going to be any delicious cake.
okay?
There will be flour and raw eggs and a bunch of utensils. So, if you've read the story, seeing my notes would not excite you. They're just things that I have to use to get to the story.
Fair enough, but I think for the sake of world building, and especially for how much you've obviously got a major backstory that you've come up with.
You're talking about things like Eric Nyberg and his story.
Yeah. Well, but also Marcus has a lot in his backstory.
Oh, certainly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, more of that will come out. More of that will come out in the books.
Yeah.
You will be exposed to more and more of these characters' pasts as you see more and more of their present and future. And, I know as an architect, I know exactly where the story is going. In fact, the last scene of the last chapter of the 4th book is already written.
Oh, wow.
So I know exactly where I am ending up.
Okay, so this won't be a George Martin scenario then.
This will not be a George Martin scenario. Now, I'm not a fast writer. So, best case scenario is going to be one novel a year. And that's, pushing it.
Right.
I'm scared I may not be able to hit that, but I will get it done because I know where I'm going.
Well, I once told Hangry that he could read my novel when I'm done with it. And it's been a while.
You have to find your writing process.
Oh, yeah. I know. I'm an architect myself. I know exactly where the man begins. I know where he ends. I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I know what kind of pistol he carries and why and the day he was born. I have all that on 3x5 cards and stuff like that. So I get what you're talking about when you say you're an architect.
Yeah.
And so if I may as well, again, not going into too much spoiler territory, but speaking of the other character, Miranda, she is very unique in the sense that she is someone, again, you look at where our science is right now, where our sensibilities are, especially when it comes to things like genetic engineering, designer babies, and the like.
Yeah.
And she's sort of the logical endpoint of where that goes. And so I don't want to spoil
No. This is fine. This is fine.
She is, shall we put it, a much smaller person than the average person physically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And so for these types of, how did you come up with this character, basically? Without,
okay. Well, the reason that Miranda is 3 feet 10 inches tall, I was thinking about what does social status look like in the future? And how is it affected by technology? So I was thinking, okay, if you have people growing up in these sort of microgravity environments where they're traveling around in space and they don't have expensive fusion drives that use, scavenged alien technology. They're on chemical drives. So a lot of the time they're in microgravity or in no gravity at all. And that's the poor people. Now, obviously, poor is very different in the future than it is today. I mean, we would not consider them poor by today's standards, but they're growing up in these microgravity. So you have all these belters who are, the women are 6'5" and the guys are 7 feet tall. And so you have an inversion of what the social status cues are today, where being taller is considered higher status. Well, in this environment, because of these technological influences, it's reversed because the wealthy are living in these higher gravity habitats. So they're shorter. So being shorter becomes a status symbol. So
in the same way that people, women who were more plump in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
Rubenesque.
Yeah. They used to be sort of, you like them pale and curvy because that was the way rich people were because they didn't have to work outside in the sun. And now, it's like be skinny and tan because that means that you don't have to work indoors and you can afford, nice food instead of processed stuff. But in this case, it's like, okay, you're genetically engineering your daughter and you have more money than taste. So she's not just going to be short, she's going to be super short.
Right.
And she's going to have permanent giant childlike eyes. And
Yeah. She's basically genetically engineered for this kind of appeal.
Yeah.
And she resembles a live action anime character.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, because this was done to her in vitro, nobody consulted her about it.
Yeah, and it's a reflection, and you mentioned this very briefly in the book about how this was quite a bit of her mother's decision.
Yeah.
And again, I think it does a very good job of not hitting you over the head with it, but showing you the fact that the selfishness of the parents, of the decisions that they took for their own benefit without any consideration for their child, it comes off very well. Yeah. I mean,
well, in the future, people will still be people.
Yeah.
And they will act like people.
I saved this part of it because I didn't want to give too much away. We've talked a bit about Miranda, but I said that Marcus lives in a world of his own making, but not of his own choosing. That juxtaposes with Miranda, who didn't even get to make her world. She didn't get to choose anything.
Yeah.
She was born into something. She has wild privilege, obviously, but she's trapped like a princess.
Yeah, and that is something that is one of the major sort of arcs of the story is that when she comes into Marcus's life, he perceives her as having all the power and all the options. And that's true in certain respects, but he doesn't realize that it's not necessarily true in others. So they see each other and they both very profoundly misread each other to start out with.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Wow. No, it is. But again, the progression from that initial misunderstanding or multiple misunderstandings and the conflict that it subsequently gives rise to and how that works itself out throughout the book, I felt that, again, the pacing was quite good and it felt natural. I suppose is the best way that I could say it.
It felt natural. Well, you know how you get something that feels natural? You make it, and then you throw half of it away because it doesn't feel natural, and then you rewrite it, and then you do it again and again and again until it feels natural.
Well, there you go. So
it feels natural because you didn't watch the sausage being made.
Well, and you know what? That there is a testament to all the work that you did, because for someone who goes in and having not seen that sausage, I thought that the flow and
it's really easy for authors to look like geniuses because we get to concentrate all the good ideas that we have in a year into a single book and throw away all the bad ones that we had during that time. So, you can really substitute a lot of hard work for talent and, look really smart either way. And I think that's sort of what's missing from modern Hollywood is that love for the story that makes you work hard to get it perfect. It kind of feels like when they write these scripts nowadays, they just feel like the script is one element of the film, like the lighting and the sound and the special effects. Well, let's just, send the writers off to their little room and order up 6 feet of script. And, then let's kick it around a bit so we can, so it can match the budget and so we can make the cool scene that we wanted to have happen. I really want to watch this chick wielding 2 swords and do a flip over the head of this monster. And let's rewrite the story so I can shoot that shot. And there's no love for the story. And there's no understanding that the story is the skeleton. There's no understanding that the script is the skeleton of the story. And it's the most important part. The reason you don't see this kind of, oh, wow, the pacing is so good or the characters are so alive is because a lot of these films are just sort of corporate products designed by committee. And there wasn't anyone who really had both the caring about the story and the power to make it come out that way.
You brought movies into this, so I have to ask. There's one of our characters is just kind of tailor-made to be in a movie.
Yeah.
The character we haven't talked about yet.
Oh, Leela.
Leela, yeah.
Yeah, we'll use her name. I think that's okay.
So Leela is tailor-made to be in a movie. And after I finished, I got to thinking about so back in late 30s, early 40s, Raymond Chandler writes The Big Sleep. I think it's 39.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a comment that Philip Marlowe talks to some thugs, and he's kind of dismissive of these guys who are evidently younger thugs, that they all talk like they're in the movies now. The movies have affected the way criminals talk. They're trying to emulate that.
Yeah.
Writers, to me, these days seem to be writing in movie terms. Like Leela, I can see on the big screen. Her interactions with everybody else, that they would make for good, entertaining moments.
Yeah. She a lot of the way she interacts using the virtual reality
She's a very visual character.
Is inspired by Looney Tunes.
Yeah, I kind of caught that.
Yeah.
She's using all these. She's using her ability to project these images to create all these very visual metaphors for what she's talking about,
right, which are themselves the Looney Tunes, sort of riffing on old Buster Keaton bits.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
But it's like Deadpool talking to the audience. It's not the author talking to the audience. It's Deadpool talking to the audience. And in the same way, this is not, the author making Leela into a movie stereotype or having her talk in those terms. It's Leela making herself do this because it's her way of expressing herself.
And she makes all these 20th century references that Marcus and Miranda just don't get.
Yeah, they're very confused by her love of old films.
Well, speaking of the author, Devon, I noticed another sort of running theme throughout both the book and you, I suppose, personally. And this is a photo of your X profile.
Yes.
And the name of your ship is the White Cat. So I wonder, are you a cat guy?
Well, I do like cats.
Okay.
There is a kitten periodically nibbling on my toes as I give this interview. But the cat avatar has a very specific story behind it. And so as you can see, I'm not a cat.
Yes.
And what happened was that somebody took my original profile picture. One of my fans took my original profile picture and he redrew it as a cat.
Oh.
And then he posts it with the caption, "Devon Eriksen cat isn't real. He can't hurt you." So I saw this and I changed my profile picture to that cat picture that he generated. And then I wrote this post denouncing these scurrilous and very hurtful rumors that I was secretly a cat and that had learned to type with its fuzzy toe beans, and that all of the podcast appearances were a paid actor. And so this is just sort of a running joke between me and my fans where they accuse me of secretly being a cat. And I say things like, no, I am certainly not a cat. I am a human that voluntarily stands under running water and enjoys citrus fruit.
And your real name isn't Larry. Got it.
I will buy the next book.
I'm here live. I'm not a cat.
I'll buy the next book if you make fuzzy toe beans a snack that belters eat.
Oh.
Oh, be honest. You're going to buy the next book anyway.
Yes, actually.
Very much so. Then that leads me to my question then. So the next book, you're thinking you've got about a year or so out, or is that going to be a bit sooner, do you think?
Well, I published November 11th. So I'm trying to hit November 11th for this year for a release date for the next one. Mm-hmm. It's looking a little bit iffy because it was originally planned as a trilogy, and I discovered several months into the process that I was going to have to divide this into 2 books. The middle part was going to have to be 2 books instead of 1. So the whole thing became 4 books, and that cost me some time. And, I'm not a fast writer. And so it may slide to early next year.
Okay.
So I'm trying to develop a sustainable pace, but this is like when you're writing your first novel, nobody's expecting anything.
Right.
There's no timetable. Nobody knows you exist. I published, and 3 weeks, 2 weeks, I think it was 10 days. 10 days after I published, I had people talking about George Martin in my timeline. Like, don't do this to us. And it's like, dude, how many years did you give George Martin before you started being really mad at him? Can I have more than 10 days, please?
Yeah. I think he's kind of collecting.
This is not like, dashing off an episode of Disney Star Wars. I am having to write and rewrite and really scratch my head over a lot of this material, because when you write a first novel that is this well received and you have people comparing you to Heinlein, I swear I had one review that was like 4 stars because it was only as good as The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Oh,
that's some high praise.
So only as good as Heinlein's 25th novel, for which he won his 3rd Hugo Award. Okay. But when you have that expectation, it's like, okay, the second one had better live up to the first one. So, I'm being very careful with this. You want to be fast as you can, but you definitely don't want to get into that sequel slump.
Yeah, no, 100%. Speaking from experience, I think George Martin has maybe perhaps collectively traumatized the entire fantasy sci-fi.
George Martin is like an anti-writer.
Yeah.
I think that he has his career, he has written negative words. He has a negative word count because all of the words he wrote are less than all of the words that we would have seen in the careers that he killed. There are brilliant, brilliant authors out there whose work we will never see because George Martin killed their careers. They had to go back to, selling pet insurance or whatever it was they did before they tried to write. He pretty much killed epic fantasy as a genre, because people won't buy the first book until the last book is done. Well, think about some of the epic kill a tree fantasy series that people used to like Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time was 12 books.
Yep.
I think it was like 4 million words, 6 million words, something like that. Imagine, it took the guy over a decade and he died.
Yeah.
He literally died trying to finish, spent the last year of his life feverishly scribbling notes so that someone else could finish his work. And, then you want to turn around and say, well, I'm not going to buy the first book until the last one is finished. You can't wait a decade to make any money at writing.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of funny,
and you do still see a few people writing like the big concept fantasy series, like Brandon Sanderson and Larry Correia. But, Larry Correia got his start in urban fantasy, and that bought him enough faith and enough fans so that he could sell books when the series wasn't finished. Son of the Black Sword, it's pretty popular. And Brandon Sanderson was like one of the last guys through the door before George Martin slammed it in the face of new authors, and Patrick Rothfuss nailed it shut.
The way you describe it, it kind of sounds like Martin accidentally did what he set out to do. He was trying to close the door on epic fantasy and be the anti-Tolkien.
Well,
and now, as you've described it, he's killed it in a business way instead of in a literary way.
He set out to kill Tolkien, and it's like Tolkien was the only fantasy author that he didn't kill because he deepened our appreciation for Tolkien a great deal. Mm-hmm. I think that he actually ended up benefiting the legacy of Tolkien, but hurting new authors. There's been a lot of criticism of his work where the idea is that he sort of writes these books inhabited entirely by thugs and victims, and there are no heroes, and he is a nihilist who doesn't believe in heroism. And some of that may be true, but what I see in those books is like, okay, you have this political squabbling between different families and noble houses in a medieval setting with a very much more sort of fantastical, magical kind of threat lurking in the background. And I think that maybe it's possible that the plan was to have a heroic character emerge and unite these people and elevate them above their petty squabbles to face the existential threat. And that's a story that I very much would have enjoyed reading. But George Martin seems to have gotten stuck in the petty squabbles between amoral thugs and never really gotten to the heroism part.
Well, the man who seems to carry the mantle of his hero has been bleeding out in the snow for over a decade now.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
So on to your own book. Well, the first book, I've got to say, it has won a couple of awards as well. As you said, it has been very well received.
Well, we have a few minor ones, and I am a finalist for the Prometheus Award, which is a big deal. And that's the Libertarian Futurist Society's award for novels. And I'm actually very proud to be a finalist because it means that regardless of whether I win or not, regardless of whether my career launches or I have to go back to software engineering, I can, for the rest of my life, get to say that I beat Salman Rushdie in a writing contest.
Amazing. And again, well deserved. I think as word of mouth travels, because you are an independent writer, you're self-published, and so you are relying, as you've said before, on word of mouth, on people following you on Twitter, etc., and the like. I think there might very well be some more awards for you in the future. I would like to predict that.
So. Every little bit helps because this is a hard business to break into. Really writing, it's like there's almost no middle ground. You have the top 0.1% who become wealthy, and you have the rest of authors who really sort of can't afford to quit their day jobs. And that's the way the business is. So you try to break out. And I'm in this funny place where I'm in neither category. I'm not getting wealthy, but the sales are paying the mortgage. That's a weird place to be in. But really, the goal is to break out and become one of these very popular writers like King or Sanderson or Correa, what have you. And that's a very hard hurdle to get over because you start out and nobody's heard of you, and it's very difficult to reach a lot of people and to persuade them to give a new author a read because they've been deluged with so much tripe by the traditional publishing industry. So, it's a long process and you try to spread the word any way you can, but it's not a career that I would recommend to anybody who doesn't really have like I need to tell this story. Right. I need to tell stories. I need to do this. I am a creative person, and if I don't do creative things, I will suffer.
Well, it's found on Amazon. You can see I've pulled it up here. Available in hardcover, in paperback, and on the Kindle edition. And I think there's going to be an audiobook coming out soon.
Oh yes, we're on a whole bunch of different platforms, but yes, we have just finished our promo video for the Kickstarter. And so the Kickstarter should be launching very soon. And we've got our ducks in a row on that one. I found 3 very talented voice actors to play the major characters. And you will get to hear samples of their work very soon when we launch our Kickstarter promo. And, I went through a lot of auditions, and some of them are terrible, but some of them were amazing. And I picked out 3 people that made me go from, oh, well, I guess I should produce an audiobook, to being really excited about the potential of this. I think that I have some really fine actors who can add a lot of depth to the experience of the story.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait for that Kickstarter, and I'm almost curious to see what the Kickstarter prizes might be as well, the tiers.
Oh, yes. We've been working hard on that as well. I don't think I have a good enough memory of exactly what we worked out to.
No. Save the surprise. Save the surprise.
Spoil it now.
Yeah.
But
No.
This is coming very soon.
That's excellent.
So I just looked you up on X. I see you're at Devon _Eriksen_. There's also a Devon Eriksen quotes X. Is that, do you run that, or is that a fan?
No, that's a fan. I had no idea that was happening for a while, and I just sort of saw that. I was like, okay.
Because you have quite the presence on X, and you've got, like I said before, some pretty great posts up there. Yeah,
well, it's my presence on X is very different from who I am as a writer, because as a fiction writer, I think that it is disgusting and a travesty to try to use fiction to make political points. It's fundamentally dishonest to try to carry on a political argument with a character that is essentially a sock puppet on your left hand. So, I don't do that in my writing, but my socio-political commentary on X is quite vehement, but it still sells books because one of the things it does is that I'm writing about something that people care about, whatever the current events are. And I'm writing in such a way that makes people say, well, maybe this guy can write. Maybe I'll try the book.
And I think they should try the book.
100%.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm definitely in agreement with you there.
So
because otherwise I'll have to go back to selling pet insurance.
It's a noble profession. Nothing wrong with that. Now, last question that I had is, again, touching on world building, Orbital Space.
Yeah.
That's the name of the series.
Yes.
That's the name of the world in which Marcus and Miranda inhabit. And right now it's planned for 4 books.
Yeah.
But for people like me who do love those long continuing series, who like knowing that there are future adventures perhaps in that universe ahead, maybe not necessarily with those same characters, but for that world to continue to be explored in some capacity beyond those 4 books. Should things go well, and should the 4 books do very well, and I'm bullish on them doing so, will there be more of Orbital Space after those 4, or is that kind of it? Chapters closed, next world that you're going to be heading to? Well,
the thing to understand about being an author is that you always have books in your head that you will never write.
Right.
Because you come up with stories or the basic ideas for stories faster than you can actually write the stories. So, no matter how prolific you are, there will always be notions that don't make it to the page.
Right.
And, as an author, what you're really doing is you're not necessarily entirely in the book selling business. You're building a brand. You're establishing public recognition. You're gaining an audience. And, when you're becoming an author, you have to think very carefully about what do I want my audience to be for? Do I want my audience to be for my writing, or do I want it to be for this universe? And, some writers are content to play in the same universe their entire careers. I mean, Terry Pratchett and his Discworld novels. How many Discworld novels are there? There must be
41, I think.
30. Okay. Yeah, lots. Lots. And, and Discworld was very flexible, so he could do all sorts of different things in it. But when you create a universe that is your brand, there is a certain hazard as well, where that brand sort of grows beyond you and it becomes this sort of corporate product that is going to be milked for money and have all the soul sucked out of it and just sort of continue to live on as this kind of zombie nightmare that shuffles around eating the brains of the living while wearing the face of something that you once loved.
I'm thinking
And,
particularly of Clancy and Herbert.
Well,
Uh,
I was thinking of Lucas.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Acolyte, which just oh boy.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't want Orbital Space to become a travesty of itself.
Right.
So, when you don't want that, you always have to take a lesson from Bill Watterson.
Yep.
And that lesson is there are two ways that you can leave an audience. You can leave them wanting more, or you can leave them not wanting more.
Yep.
And if you leave them not wanting more, that means they're sick of it and you've gone on too long. So, whether I do more with Orbital Space, whether I tell the story of Eric Nyberg up close and personal, is a decision based on how I feel when I end the 4-book series.
Yep.
But I promise you this is when I stop doing Orbital Space, you will still want more of it. Because
Right.
I will stop before you get bored. And at that moment that I stop and do something else, I will just hope that I have accumulated enough faith that people will believe, okay, he's going to give us something else that we're going to love just as much.
Well, I'm rooting for you. I can't wait for the second book to come out. I can't wait to read all 4 books. I'm grateful that this isn't just the one and done, that there are going to be more.
Yeah. It would be that ending had some, it had some satisfaction. It had some payoff, but it definitely would have been cruel to leave it there.
Oh, 100%.
Because there are some very unanswered questions, and I have answers for them planned. So,
I mean, the image that sort of hit my mind was basically the end of Empire Strikes Back when Lando and Chewie are flying off in the Falcon to go and continue the adventure, and so there was a bit of that. But look, we have taken up so much of your time. Thank you. This was such a
this has been fun.
100%. This has been great. I really appreciate the fact that I was able to speak to you, especially after having read your book. For me, this is exciting. This is a new experience, and so I'm very, very grateful for that. I'm also really grateful for Martin to have joined us. Yes, Theft of Fire right there.
Yes, Christine will be very sad if I don't hold it up occasionally.
And
she does the marketing, but
please thank her for me once again. But let's say here, last few words on why someone should buy this book.
Well, if you miss the science fiction from the late 20th century, if you're not done reading stories that are excited about the possibilities for the future, then you'll probably enjoy this because that's why I wrote it.
All right. Well, I can attest to that. I was one of those people who enjoyed it, and it was a nice, refreshing change of pace.
And we've got to inspire more authors to try to do that because, one author alone can never keep up with the appetites of readers. So I'm hoping that I will inspire more authors to become independent, to start independent, to tell the stories that the trad pub Manhattan Big Five industry isn't interested in seeing told, and to swing for the fences and really try to create something readers will love.
Well, that's fantastic. Martin, any final comments?
I got to say to anybody listening to this, give this book a read. I really want to thank Hangry for introducing me to it. Devon, thank you for writing it. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Oh, that makes it all worth it.
And audience members, if you are listening, we highly encourage you to go out and pick up this book. It's on Amazon. It's on Goodreads. Keep an eye out for the upcoming Kickstarter for the audiobook too. And follow Devon on Twitter because those are...
It's a party. It's a party.
It's a party. I will tell you that. It's a lot of fun. So, on that note, Devon, once again, thank you very much for this. I wish you nothing but success in the future. Can't wait to see more of Orbital Space. And I'm following your website, which is Devon Eriksen. I'm going to throw that up here right now. So it's devoneriksen.com, ERIKSEN.com. And you've got your novels, you've got updates on your writings, where things are, and I think you can even get a couple of what was the phrase you used? Flash writing.
The girls threw up a couple of little one-off pieces that I dashed off just to give a sample of what my writing is like. There's also 3 sample chapters on the website of Theft of Fire. So if you're one of those people who has been burned repeatedly by buying books and they're terrible, then you can give those a read and see if you're into what I'm doing.
Perfect. Well, once more, thank you very much. Audience members, as I've always said before, we love to hear from you. We love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment down below. If you pick up the book, if you read it, tell us what you think. Go try to follow Devon on Twitter, or X rather, and give us your own views on where we should turn to for good sci-fi or fantasy. If you have any comments or suggestions.
We've had enough cursing the darkness. It's time to light some candles.
100%. So on that note, give us your thoughts and comments down below. We read them all. We love them. And you guys are fantastic. As Pro always says, you are the engines of this entire organization and operation, such as it is. And we are all the better for it. So on that note, Devon, Martin, thank you once again for this fantastic conversation, and all the best. And hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Please comment, like, and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to That Park Place Podcasts Online, your source for exclusive content and highlights from WDW Pro, The Pro Show, and That Park Place for all the news that should be fun.